We've got a really exciting panel lined up for you guys now. The future of mindfulness at work with some expert insights. And I'm really thrilled to share the stage with the two folks that you see to the right and left. I'm going to take a moment to introduce both of them. And I've known both of them for quite some time. And so I'm going to start with Edjlali. Andy came to the first summit that was in 2014 and has been involved in this field for a very long time. He's the former chief mindfulness officer at Aetna. He's been working for folks like Potential Project, delivering enterprise-sized mindfulness programs. He's worked with small companies. He's done quite a mix of things. He knows what it's like to be an internal champion trying to get a program up and running. He knows what it's like to be someone who's trying to provide mindfulness services for organizations of varying sizes. And he's one of our CWMF instructors. And so he's been working with us with that program for quite some time. So let's give it up for Edjlali. And on my right, I have Peter Bostelmann. Peter is a New Ventures West graduate, and we connected over a decade ago before we both kind of went our routes within the mindfulness field. He launched the program at SAP, and I love his story, but I'll let him tell it when he does his session. You can hear more about it, but he was able to grow that program pretty much on his own, got the program up and running, and he scaled it to be, I believe, the largest program in the enterprise in the world right now, or pretty close to it.
Thank you. Okay, so the response, well, we offer it. It's the most popular program within SAP, and I think also we're doing this now since 10 years. We actually are in our 10 years anniversary this year. Yay! Yeah, I think we have quite a reach to other organizations in bringing corporates, bringing mindfulness to large enterprises.
Very good. So we have two chief mindfulness officers, Peter at SAP, Andy was chief mindfulness officer at Aetna, and so they both bring just an incredible perspective to this work. And I'd like to just jump into it because we do have limited time, and just these guys have such incredible experience and backgrounds. And I think the first question that I'm going to propose, even though we had some prepared stuff, just going with the flow, is there a future for chief mindfulness officers, or is that starting to kind of get lumped into other things and sort of evolve into something else?
I think this question points to me. I definitely think there is a future. I think it's growing, and it's a future that we have to make happen. But I think that self-awareness and mindfulness practices and organizations will continue to be there and will rise, and it needs somebody, or it needs a team. That's at least our experience. It needs a team that maintains integrity, that really understands what it's about. There's a bit of a tendency that, like we saw in yoga, that mindfulness becomes like flattened out, and let's make it shorter and quicker and online, and but nothing against having lots of short interventions. But I believe it needs a team to create governance structures to make sure that this has been done in a proper way. And for that, I think we need teams, and we need somebody who leads these teams, and to have the right awareness of the importance. It's good. This is the leader of this team is called Chief Mindfulness Officer. So that's my take on it. And I want to add, I feel very humbled to be here. So, and I feel this is a good mutual learning. So I'm expecting also to hear a lot back from you, how you people that are coming for a reason to the Mindful Leaders Summit. I'm curious about your questions, about your perceptions. And so I'm not saying I have all the wisdom. I have some experience. I'm happy to pass on, and I hope it's helpful. So.
Thank you, Peter. And Andy, similar question, but I want to play with it a little bit. Is mindfulness being kind of absorbed into other groups and being led by others?
Yeah, that's a great question. And just to finish up on the previous question, I do think there's always going to be a place and a need for chief mindfulness officers. I think that the impetus and the opportunities are going to change, and I think the PR high watermark is probably passed for mindfulness in organizations, and that has implications for, how people are going to get into that role. And I think Peter and you are pointing to something that is happening. I think that there is, in many places, there is a flattening out. I think that's a great metaphor for what's happening in mindfulness in organizations, where it's becoming, it is becoming shorter, it's becoming more accessible, it's becoming, I think, a little commoditized, and it's becoming something that we do when we need to do it, something situational, as opposed to a practice that we use to change how we kind of go through our lives and deal with stuff along the way. So while it's more accessible than ever, I think that some of the benefits are perhaps starting to wane. And also, I think it is getting absorbed into other things, because now we see wellness apps that include everything, really, from financial well-being to movement to eating, to every possible dimension of well-being, and mindfulness being a part of that. And I think there's nothing wrong with that. But the challenge is that mindfulness is really something very unique. And it's really something that kind of undergirds all those things and deserves, in a way, kind of, obviously I have a particular perspective on this, but it deserves kind of a place of its own, I think, so that people can really get the most out of it. I do think it is getting absorbed into the broader wellness community, especially, in terms of the well-being side of it.
Mm-hmm. I'll ask you, just with this idea of the commoditization, I mean, there's a lot of apps out there and things that people are using, and often in corporate environments, people are given access to apps and subscribing to them. And it feels like in some ways that might be taking away from opportunities for individuals who might want to help introduce mindfulness, teach mindfulness to organizations. And so I'm curious to hear, how do you guys imagine or see just that evolution of kind of app usage and humans teaching humans, and how they complement or might compete with each other?
Well, I think actually they can work really well together, because in apps, I mean, there's some really good mindfulness content out there. I do think that there's some really nice practices, and there's some good teachers or people who put out great content on apps. The thing is more about how you relate to those apps and what you do with it. So it's almost a great situation where if you were to come into an organization and they've already got these resources that are available for people, if you were to meet a program and say, now for the next week, try this practice on this app, and let's get together and talk about it, or look for these types of practices. I think if a human can mediate the relationship between people and apps, they can be really, really helpful. And that's, I think, really a lot of what's required.
It's good for humans to be helpful before AI takes over.
Definitely, I would like to build up on that, and I cannot agree more. Apps are very helpful, and they're great to support the efforts, and for people also to start, get first impressions, and to check out a variety of teachers. I believe to make it stick in an organization, it helps to have also human beings as multipliers that embody mindfulness, that have a deep idea, and that are point person people can talk to, and that also can personalize it a little more to the organization, as opposed to having an app coming from the outside. So there's a big benefit if you have the means to build an own community of teacher or of ambassadors, of people that do mindfulness in your organization, to normalize it and make it part of it and really make it stick there. And I wanted to build up on the previous question. Actually, I think one with the it fits in the field of the apps. I think there's a bit of the risk, and you said it, mindfulness is a practice, it's not an idea, right? It's not like, okay, I got it, and now let's be a little mindful. There's a lot of terrible misconceptions. So to have people actually in the organization that embody that you have to practice, there is no shortcut. And with this practice, you change your brain and the interaction of your brain and your body. So I think, in short, it's a great combination, having apps and having people in parallel to the apps.
And I'm curious, in our unconference yesterday, one of the things that came up was this idea of more mindful culture and sort of a shift in that way, as it does feel that there had been that watermark sort of PR hype around mindfulness in the workplace. Things have caught on. What's the next frontier? Is that mindful culture? What do you guys see as sort of the next era?
I think can I go first? I think this is a really important question. I'm getting amped up here. Because what is this all about? And I think, speaking of misconceptions, one terrible misconception is mindfulness is a relaxation technique. If you only do your mindfulness, you can cope with the stress we all have, right? And I believe it starts way earlier, so that you as a human being understand yourself better, have higher self-awareness, can change your habits, as Dr. Brewer pointed out so fascinatingly. And then once I am more mindful, how do I interact with others? And from I to we, how can I then change the culture we're in? How can I make this culture more human-centric? How can we create processes in these organizations we're in that doesn't leave the humans out, that are wisdom-based and compassionate? And these are phrases that feel like a little bit is wishful thinking. What I really like is that there's more and more science coming that shows actually if you have such a culture, that holds and supports the human beings in that, that these organizations are more, that these organizations are outperforming organizations that have a very non-mindful culture.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that a lot of programs, generally mindfulness programs, work with helping the individual to change how they interact with their environment. And that's a great place to start. But this has a lot to do with how you roll things out, for instance, in an organization. Because what can happen is you can invite a lot of individuals to a program, and then they'll go back out into their organizations and they'll say, or their teams, and they'll say, wow, I learned these great tools. And what are their teammates going to say? Oh, cool. Good luck with that, Let me get back to what I'm doing. And I think that the molecule, in a way, of organizational culture is the team, right? And if you really want to have an impact, I think it's helpful to think about how to bring people together that can support each other. And it doesn't have to be people who work together, but I think that's a really powerful way to look at it. It can also be a community that you create when people come together to keep them together, to keep these practices alive. But I think changing culture is not an individual job. I think it's creating self-sustaining groups that then perhaps can connect with each other and build out from there. So I think this idea of community is really helpful. I think the groups are like the median space, the median place that we need to go through to get to a culture. And then when the groups start to connect, then you can start talking about a culture. And Mo, you know that when we talk to the people in the CWMF program and other places who have gone out and started programs in the workplace, the thing that really distinguishes the ones that last is the sense of community, because communities are self-sustaining. Individuals, when they go out into a place, if you're lucky, they'll keep practicing, but they won't be able to kind of infect the people around them, to steal one of Judd's metaphors.
Thank you. And I'm curious to play with that idea of community. So we've all heard the loneliness epidemic and that people have been going through, and with COVID and everything that happened. And so community has this opportunity to not only bring people together to practice, but bring them together to be with other people. And I'm curious, what are you guys seeing out there that's working and forming communities? Because culture is a big thing that takes a lot of work, and to adjust community might be, and as you're mentioning, like a good starting point. But even getting community going isn't very easy. And I'd love to hear either personal experience or clients that you've worked with that, how you've heard things done.
Well, I think it's closely interrelated, community and the culture, right? The culture is the behavior of all the groups you bring together. And in a community, you can start strengthening it. So you bring together people that feel like, oh, how can I be more compassionate as a leader? It's challenging. What does it actually mean? How do I deal with difficult things, with the hard things in a human way, as Rasmus Horgat says so nicely. And coming back to this idea that I think it's a lot about demystifying, at least this is what I perceive in my work. Coming back from mindfulness is only to de-stress and prevent burnout. No, it actually makes us more powerful to deal with change. That we learn, okay, there's something difficult going on. How can I communicate transparent? Or do I have the courage as a leader to show that I'm challenged? And that's for me challenging, and that I have the self-awareness and the skills to be compassionate with somebody else that is in distress, and not to shut down and close off and make it in the old school way, but to be somebody who really has done his or her work and can hold others. And many of you probably know there was this great study, which is now maybe 8 years ago, Google did. What is the most outperforming teams, right? What is the common denominator? And I forgot the name of the study, and there were a couple of factors, and by far number one factor was psychological safety. Means that you as a human being can be a human being, that you can A, make mistakes, B, you can show when you have a bad day because we're humans, and you have safe space in it. And that's what we need to educate as change makers. I think we're all change makers as mindful leaders. We have to educate in our organizations to why these practices actually support the way how we are with each other. It's not just a nice to have and a remedy. So in coming back to the community and the culture, if you create this culture where people connect, you have a very strong community. And building up on what Andy said, so the model that works quite well within SAP is a global tech company with 100,000+ employees. Is we have trained over the years and almost 100 teachers, and about 65, 70 are active at the moment. And this is a network within the organization that is a very strong community where we exchange, okay, what do we see with there's certain things going with the years as organizational changes, some we like, some we don't like so much. And then this community addresses this together. How can we keep our practices alive? So that's the community. But and then we have local mindfulness communities and lots of locations where people also feel like, oh, this is the way how I want to talk with each other. And so we often hear back that we have a space where we can be real with each other. And I think this is another piece of mindfulness, so that you get out of this, like, here's a mask, I'm a business, I have to pretend, I have to be like something. And how can I be integrate more the different parts of myself to one to one real part of me, to bring our whole selves to life. That's what I want to say.
Yeah.
Indeed.
Just to kind of pick that ball up and run with it a little bit. One of the things you notice when you work with mindfulness in organizations is that there's going to be people that are going to be passionate about this, right? And there's almost as soon as you start there's going to be people who bring energy in to the process. And it's important to find a way to leverage that energy and to also direct it. But to know there's a lot of energy in the system already. And, this idea of training teachers, a network of teachers inside the organization, or perhaps just working with champions, creating a network of champions. Because that does a couple of things. Number one, it creates somebody who knows about mindfulness, who is perhaps from your function or your location or your department, that you can speak to, that you can you have a sense of connection with, because they're doing kind of the same thing you are. And the other thing is that it creates those small groups out in the organization that can kind of take their own, harness their own energy. So thinking about how to scale something like this and how to bring it into a culture, and this was one of the questions actually you sent us, Mo.
The question that we've ignored.
Yeah, we haven't read to later.
You took for a second and a bunch of questions we just thought for really.
But how do you make mindfulness adaptive? The way you make it adaptive, excuse me, is find the people who are in the different places, so they don't actually have to adapt it. They take it and translate it for their group within the organization. So leveraging the energy that's in the system and using that energy to kind of adapt it and create their own groups within the organization.
And I think I've heard in both cases there's sort of this central kind of concentration and then kind of localizing out. So bringing together the champions, really investing and helping kind of get them trained properly and really connected with one another. And then they go back to their smaller groups and kind of localize it and figure that out.
Well, I think that there's a lot of ways to solve for that. Depending on the type of organization. Some organizations can go with a really decentralized structure, where people teach a lot of different practices, and it lends itself to more creativity and generativity, if you want. But it also creates a lot of potential for kind of going off track and going into places that might not be as helpful. and as aligned. And then there's other areas where it makes sense to have a very, very clear perspective, a very clear set of tools, because that's much more accessible and it's much more scalable. But there's going to be different answers for different organizations.
Yeah, but building up on that, I think governance structures are important. If you roll it out in larger organizations, that also in different cultures, maybe even in different continents, because there's so many different ideas what mindfulness is, and then of course mindfulness and spirituality has an overlay. And I think what do we want to do? We want to bring it to people that don't know about it by now, right? If you want to spread it, so we have to turn the skeptics at least into curious skeptics. And I think one way to scare them off is if it feels too spiritual, too esoteric. So that's one piece where you learn. But I believe it's helpful if people learn how to talk about this, that it feels not too far off from the culture we are in, right? And then that's why I believe that the governance structure to help people to understand what we do, and also to leave certain practices that are not fitting to the type of the organization, to leave them out is quite helpful. And I've seen it in one large German industrial company, I don't say a name here, where a lot of mindfulness practitioners are allowed to do part of their work in this organization, bringing mindfulness practices in. And they're all lovely people, and they, with a lot of heartfelt passion, they bring different things into the organization, and they also go and do sound bathing, and they do tree hugging, and they do other things where they're looking for a long time in a candle. And it's not that I'm saying I wouldn't do this in my private life. I'm a spiritual person, but I have a distinction what works. So this is for me a teaching capacity or a change maker capacity, what works in the environment I'm in. And in this organization, they managed successfully that in the top level leadership, they think, yeah, this weirdos say they do spiritual things. It doesn't support business. Sorry to be that blunt here, but I could see how by not making it an organization like or a team like in other organizations, where I say, okay, here's a business reason, this is why we do it, we measure it, this is our outcome, and we can justify that we spend corporate money, and you don't have to take the heart out of it, but you have to be skillful how you package it. And for that, it helps to have a guiding team. Like you train this in your organization, how to bring mindfulness to organizations, so that people get skilled. Okay, what helps to that we don't have to reinvent the wheel, and also by that repeat mistakes and then learn, oh, I shouldn't have said it. So yeah, I can go on and on. Come to my blog, I talk more about this.
So no tree hugging at a German software company.
This is being recorded. Yeah, make a confession. I personally love hugging trees, but I wouldn't do a course in my organization around that. Not before I would have a personal conversation with somebody. So we're very careful what we spread, what we distribute. Then again, to make it safe to people that are, this sounds interesting, but I don't want to do this spooky stuff. So we do it, we roll on the Trojan horse, right? We have some undisclosed side effects. Yes, your heart might be touched, and yes, you might feel me, and you might become more human, but we don't say it too loud in the beginning.
Thank you. I do want to touch on something that you mentioned. So all this takes resources, takes time, commitment. And in the past, what we've seen over the last decade is how people kind of make a case for mindfulness or justify ROI has shifted a little bit. I'm curious if you guys could speak about kind of how that's changed and where you see that going.
You want to first?
How the measurement game has changed? Yeah. I don't know. You want to go on this one first? I have something. It's going to be more of a tangent. Well, you've been here recently.
How the measurement game has changed.
Well, I could share a little bit from some of the things that I've seen. So from just our perspective, early on, there was this sense of how when you talk about ROI, we need to really make it performance-based. Like wellness wasn't a major issue. This is like 10 years ago. People weren't necessarily talking about wellness. Mm-hmm. And then there was a shift. There was the pandemic. And I think mental health has really been impacted by that across the board with burnout, anxiety, and stress. And now there's been more of this, well, you know what, we don't want to leave all this out because that's so important, of kind of finding more of a balance between those two. So it was sort of like, let's not talk about wellness. It might kind of denigrate it or make it feel less valuable. Let's really focus on performance and try to figure out how to bring this into leadership programs. And now it feels like there's a bit more of a shift that, hey, everyone could benefit from mindfulness, and how do we make it accessible to everyone to help through wellness and whatever else it might help?
Definitely. So there's, as we all know, right, in the last couple of years, something big happened with this pandemic, and the understanding life is fragile, and then many people struggle with their mental health in coping with all of this. I think this has become to a much wider awareness, and also that this has an effect. Again, I'm speaking here about organizations that on the performance of the employees and the capacity that they can serve the and the goals of this organization. So the awareness for the need to keep a mentally supportive or organizational structure that supports mental health, and the awareness if the mental health is declining on employees, that's definitely has grown. I think before the pandemic, even the world mental health and organizations are still a bit of a sticky or a dangerous subject. So many people didn't want to go there. Now it has become, in my perception, much more, we know that and we need to support it. But I want to also build on the other thing in my perception, again, and maybe I'm in just in a very specific bubble chamber, but I hear that more the corporate leader, more senior leader, maybe it's a generation that's now coming and growing into these roles. There's more acceptance, more understanding. Yes, mindfulness practices, mental trainings are important. Of course, we need to do it. So I think it will also stick and stay in the leadership programs. And to build on what Andy said earlier, so I think also this big wave of mindfulness has a bit ebbed. But we also perceive that again people come and question. So I think the need and the understanding we need to do something about it, despite the hype is not so loud. Is clearly there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have a couple of different thoughts about this, and most familiar with this. A lot of times people want to know what's the ROI on mindfulness, and I just find that to be a really annoying question. There is kind of an answer. I mean, if you look at wellness programs overall, it's probably about 3 to 1, you know. But there's so many things that companies never bother checking the ROI on because nobody really cares. They just assume that it has to be this way, right? And I think that going down the ROI road is a road to nowhere because, number one, HR people, it's number one, HR is not a revenue center. You know, they're not making money. It's a cost center. So what you need to do is you need to spend your money wisely to reach your HR goals. So our whole premise is flawed. And then after that, if you come up with an ROI, it's just going to be a formula. No one's ever going to see that money. You're never going to get that check in the mail, you know, or into your account. So the whole ROI thing just kind of drives me crazy. But in terms of what's happening now, I do think that there's a bigger emphasis on mental well-being in the workplace. The thing is that mindfulness is kind of the day-to-day stress thing. And now I'm seeing a lot more availability in organizations for proper therapy, you know, with licensed therapists. And actually the place where mindfulness is really showing up is very active is in the therapeutic community, you know, where it's being drawn out of kind of the day-to-day thing. It's kind of being commoditized there. But in terms of the therapy that you might get, there's a lot of mindfulness embedded in there. So that's one of the things that I've seen that's kind of changed in terms of how mindfulness relates to well-being. And the thing about mental health is also you can't really measure it that well because that's protected information, right? That's HIPAA information. So I don't know if you're ever going to have good measures on how many people have clinical anxiety in your organization, but it seems like that's what mindfulness is moving more towards addressing in some ways. So the game is changing, and I think the goal of mindfulness to help well-being is as strong as ever, but it's happening in a different way.
Very good. Now, I do want to see if we could open it up to some audience questions, so I do want to save a little bit of time and make sure we're good with the Q&A mics and invite folks to line up if you got a question or two. I do have plenty more questions. I might ask one while we give people an opportunity if they do want to ask a question to line up. And I think that, I guess I'm curious, when you look at kind of the evolution of well-being, and you're kind of hinting on this, on what people are doing differently, But in the workplace, how does the evolution of well-being look like? What's happening?
Well, I see that a lot of, I think there's a lot of talk behind it, and there's a lot of resources that are really easy for employers to use to put out there. And you'll be happy to know that I coined a new word over the weekend called well-washing. Like, you put whitewashing and greenwashing, where, the sustainability part of the companies actually sits in the PR department, And so now I think that now we're going to see a lot of well-washing where people say, oh, we care about our employee well-being because we have this great app and it has whatever they need. Check the box and move on. So I think that's one of the concerns I had about that.
Yeah, and exactly. I totally agree. And then, of course, one of the big critics, Ron Perser, with Mindfulness, he goes in this direction, right? That it's been taken and misused. And it's very important questions to see how can we use it in a proper and in a skillful and a wise way. And again, this is my case why I believe we need people that have a deep practice in the organization if they want to bring it, so that they can maneuver against the well-washing.
Yeah. Very good. Well, we've got some questions, so let's turn to the audience.
Okay. Is it on? Yes, you can hear me. So my question is, I work in the corporate compliance.
I'm sorry, do you mind pulling the microphone
Yeah.
a little bit down and speaking into it?
Actually, I don't know how. Is that better?
That's a bit better.
I'm on my tiptoes, though.
You could point it down, too.
There we go. How's that?
Yeah.
So I work in the corporate compliance space. So my question is are you seeing a lot of interaction with mindfulness in relation to corporate compliance? Are mindful programs interacting with compliance programs at the C-suite level? And are you seeing tone at the top slow down? That's my question. If you don't have an answer, it's okay.
I'm not aware of interaction at the C-suite in the cases I know. The answer I have is that I think mindfulness leads to more ethical behavior, and you have less compliance cases. And then our whole team there's a compliance group within SAP. They all did mindfulness training, so it helps them in their work of dealing with difficult cases.
Okay, so you've seen you've interacted with the corporate compliance program.
Yes.
And you, sir?
Not so much.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Question. Oh, I'm on this side.
So first, thank you, Mo, again for bringing us all together. I'm just love coming back every year. And I was hoping to hear from Peter if he had any sort of rebuttal to Andy's comments on the ROI calculation, since I know that SAP has done a lot of work in that area.
I was speaking already about it. Thank you. Yes, in some ways this question is annoying. I see that, and part of my team, they don't like when I talk about it. But I think again, it's a teaching skill or it's a change maker skill. If you want to bring it to an organization, find a way that you talk in the language your bosses talk about, and if they talk in ROI, find a way to talk to explain why spending corporate money and this program serves the organizational goals. That's what the RA says. But also, don't make the mistake to trench too deep into numbers and try to have a rock solid RA calculation, because we are a bit in a field that is what's the word I'm missing? I'm mildly jet lagged right now.
Fluid.
So the changes in the behavior of people, that they're often not so easy to measure, and there's always subject to interpretation. That's what I'm trying to say. And so I would rather look for ways to have a lot of evidential data. So in an ideal case, you find two sales units, one does mindfulness, the other not. And if the sales unit with mindfulness is outperforming the other, then you have a very solid business case. But again, to your point, I think it's important to understand how and for your organization, if you want to promote mindfulness programs, to explain why mindfulness practices, and you can even use a different word since it's a bit charged, why these practices of consciousness, of higher awareness, how it's supporting your specific organizational goals. make an assumption, measure against it, provide evidence in your programs, and then I think you're very solid in rolling it out further. I hope this is answering your question.
I'd like to add to that, if that's okay. First of all, I agree with everything that you're saying. I think that just the ROI is just a fake, it's a phrase that draws you down a road that you don't want to go. But what you really want to do is, as Peter said, show how you're delivering against corporate goals.
Yeah.
What's already important for the corporation. So at Aetna, we were, we tried to be pretty rigorous about this. And when we looked at the results of people, thousands of people who did our mindfulness programs, we looked at their stress levels, of course, how they've changed, and we looked at their scores on employee engagement surveys. Now, we didn't have access to individuals' employee engagement survey results, but what we did is we embedded some of the same items, some of the same questions that were in the employee engagement survey into the pre and post test. So we were able to see that people were more engaged with the organization. And this is something that the company cares about. They spend a lot of money every year to do this survey and to figure out how that's going. So there are, I would encourage you to use the metrics, see what impact mindfulness has on the metrics that the company is already interested in, that they're already moving towards, and you'll find that. The other challenge with mindfulness is that a lot of times it's not the only thing that a company is doing, So you might see at Aetna, actually, what we saw is we had a 10-week program, Mindfulness at Work, that was actually being delivered by eMindful, a vendor, been delivered for years. And what we found is that over the years, the pre-score of people's stress levels started to go down. We said when people started the program, it turned out that they were less stressed than they used to be. Now, unfortunately, what that means is that they're not going to get as unstressed. They're not going to get as much less stress from there. So it actually looked like our program was becoming less effective because people were coming in less stressed. But the point is, we couldn't really say that these people took this program and therefore they're less stressed. It was more like a broad thing across the organization. And that's another thing you can look at is like, what is the impact in a more general way instead of trying to look at the programmatic impacts. But I think the main thing is to line yourself up and see if you can measure the difference on the metrics that the company cares about already.
Thank you. And I'm just going to share, Andy could geek out on data.
Something like that.
Like kind of content with ROI, but when it comes to numbers and breaking them down, he's definitely got a very strong background in that. So we've got about 5 minutes, and so we're going to try to take one, maybe two more questions. And of course, Andy and Peter will be here, and so you'll get an opportunity to go up to them between breaks and things and check in too.
Thank you. Thanks so much for being here. First, I'd like to say I'm a self-proclaimed Chief Mindfulness Officer. I decided to name myself that and put it in my title, much to the chagrin of my higher-ups, but they're fine with it now. But I want to go to the mental health conversation quickly because I'm wondering about how to approach the conversation. We, in our organization, decided to bring in BetterHelp, and we didn't know what would happen, but we're a small nonprofit, 135 humans, and 50% of them started using it. We didn't know that would happen, and 50% of those are first-time therapy users ever. And I am a strong, fervent believer that it is one of the legs in the stool of well-being and mindfulness. And so I'm wondering, though, how do I go into other organizations as a facilitator and say, your folks need therapy?
So, can you say a little bit about the role that you see mindfulness playing in this in terms of?
I think, in everything that we do, in whatever organization we're in diversity work, in the work we do to reduce stress, mindfulness plays a role in terms of reflection, self-compassion is a huge piece of that. In my own journey, though, I found that therapy was a needed component, whether in my case, to address trauma or in whatever case somebody comes in with. And I've noticed that across the board in my organization, folks will start to engage in mindfulness and then they start to realize things and then they need a little bit more support. And that's not something that we're equipped to do as facilitators. And I think having that backup to say, hey, this might be getting to a place where you're ready for another sort of level of support.
I think you just nailed it, honestly. I think that, if we can offer mindfulness in organizations, what happens? Judd said it very clearly, self-awareness. And self-awareness will open so many doors. And one of the doors that will open is to say, this stuff that I'm experiencing is fine and it's okay. And yet there's some serious stuff here that maybe I don't know how to deal with, or maybe it's outside of my realm. So mindfulness, I think, can play a facilitative role in that to help to open those doors. And it's important to do that handoff, right? Any mindfulness teacher knows that there's some people will come up to you in a class and say, or after a class and say, I had this really powerful experience and it's kind of upsetting me. And when, this is not mindfulness anymore, this is something else. And to be able to do that handoff and have those resources. But I think it's a great testament to self-awareness that so many people are exploring this.
Thanks.
Good question. Now, we are at time, but I'm going to say let's take one more brief question, brief response, and then we'll wrap up. And we'll go to the side bit.
This will probably not be such a brief question, but I'm Clara Fang, and I'm an equity and racial justice consultant. And I was wondering, how is the field dealing with diversity or the lack of diversity in the mindfulness field? I think it's fair to say we are a rather privileged group. And then how does mindfulness itself have a role in addressing racial equity?
Good question. Yes, that might not be brief, but we'll try our best.
Why, just because we're two little white guys here, moderated by another guy? What are we talking about? Well, I think opening up mindfulness to more diverse audiences is a huge need and an ongoing project, and that is a very big topic. And I would just point out that there is that need, and I think that mindfulness itself can facilitate that through bringing awareness to our own biases and recognizing them, and recognizing that we all have them. They're normal, and all we need to do is be aware of them, notice when they kick in, and work with them skillfully. So I think mindfulness can help in both of those places. But I think it goes also, last year I gave a talk about white-collar mindfulness, right? And I also see a very big class distinction, right? The people who don't, people who are working in the call centers, who are driving the trucks, they're not hearing about this. They're not cruising the internet looking to see what webinar I can attend this afternoon. So I think there's a lot of opening in a lot of different directions that can happen. And actually, I'm going to talk about this I think tomorrow or someday while I'm here to say that, we don't want this to be a club. And this is really important for everyone here. It's easy to get started by getting your friends together and saying, this is cool, let's do it together. But at some point you have to get out of this is our cozy little mindfulness club, and kind of blow the doors open and see who's being left out. How can we invite them in? And that's not an answer, but it's really just kind of echoing the importance of the question. So thank you. Any additional thought?
I think just can build on what Andy said. I agree that mindfulness opens our own awareness for unconscious bias that can become more conscious about in-group, out-group thinking. And I think it's another case that, and then I can see it in our organization, that the D&I has become a bigger topic in the last 10 years, and how the D&I department works with my team together for creating higher awareness. So that's a part. And I believe actually in an organization that's one good place to start, because you can make it available to all employees. That's what we do, regardless of their role and their what they actually do, so that they can. So it's one way to distribute it and to make it more accessible. And you could argue that still, of course, people that work in a large tech company are already in some ways privileged as opposed to other groups, for sure. So yes, it has to become spread more broadly. That's all I can say in this short notice, and I'm happy to have more discussions around it.
Absolutely. And I'll just share a quick thought. I sat on the Insight Meditation Community Board, Vice Chair Tara Brock's organization, for a number of years. And this has been an issue for a very long time. And I think for me, one of the things I advocated for very strongly, and you'll see within Mindful Leader, is that you need more diverse teachers. And so when you have more diverse teachers, that's where people are kind of getting that first impression, sort of getting connected. And I just felt fundamentally like more diverse teachers will, in that same way that you kind of have a global sort of training and then localization, is one of the best approaches to reach more people and make this more accessible. Great question. Well, let's give it up to our two awesome panelists.
It's good. It's good.